Please welcome the Librarian of Congress, Dr. Carla Hayden.
Good evening. Good evening. And welcome to the Library of Congress. It is our pleasure to have everyone here for a very special night as we open the library's newest exhibition, Rosa Parks in Her Own Words. It is my honor to welcome members of Congress, including members of the Congressional Black Caucus, members of the Rosa Parks family who have come to Washington for this special celebration. Can we give them a hand? We'd also like to welcome the Rosa and Raymond Parks Institute for Self-Development, led by Ms. Elaine Steele. And that's another round of applause. And photographer Donna Turek, whose photo of Ms. Parks is prominently displayed and a vital part of the exhibition. And all the leaders and staff of the different cultural institutions across Washington, including Secretary of the Smithsonian, Dr. Lonnie Bunch, and the Archivist of the United States, Mr. David Ferriol. And our library guests and staff and our viewers on live. This is being live streamed right now. And I have to tell you, we are radiating with joy and pride tonight because it is our pleasure to open this beautiful and compelling new exhibition about one of our country's most beloved civil rights icons, Rosa Parks. The collection resonates strongly with me. After I was sworn in as the 14th Librarian of Congress in 2016, the very first collection I was able to see was the Rosa Parks papers. And library manuscript specialist Adrian Cannon, who was a descendant of Carter G. Woodson, father of Black history, showed me the collection. And she carefully presented to me the different photographs and letters and private notes handwritten by Mrs. Rosa Parks. And Adrian is here tonight and is the proud curator of the exhibition. From the first moment I saw her family Bible, followed by all of her personal letters and writings, I felt the overwhelming power of the collection. An example, in one letter she wrote after the arrest, I had been pushed around all my life and felt at this moment that I couldn't take it anymore. I knew then, when I read those words, that we had to share these papers with the public for a much broader view. And in this wonderful exhibit, through her own words, the Rosa Parks, you will discover, was not always writing for publication or posterity. She was writing in the moment and for herself. This is not the Rosa Parks we all met in textbooks or in public service announcement, but it is the very complex, the very human, and the very real Rosa Parks. Her powerful story and her long fight for justice have always resonated with me. And as the first woman and the first African American to serve as the Librarian of Congress, I take special pleasure in having the Rosa Parks collection housed here in the world's largest library, side by side, with the papers of Frederick Douglass, Abraham Lincoln, Mary Church Terrell, and Thurgood Marshall. Rosa Parks lived a life dedicated to equal rights and social justice, and she helped change the country with the example she set. As a statue of Rosa Parks stands with pride in the Capitol Rotunda, in this exhibition, you will see her standing tall, quite literally, as her photos, images of her papers, and videos tower more than 12 feet above you. None of this would have been possible without the generosity of the Howard G. Buffett Foundation, who made the Rosa Parks collection a gift to the library and to the nation. It all started when Jesse Holland, a journalist at the time, learned that the collection was stored away in boxes in a warehouse. He wrote a story about it, and his story was read and seen by Mr. Howard Buffett, who bought the papers and gave them to the library so that they could be preserved, scanned, and seen by everyone. Jesse is now a scholar in residence in the Library of Congress's John W. Kluge Center. Now the that deserves a hand. The collection comprises some 10,000 items drawn from both Ms. Parks' private life and her decades of work for civil rights. It includes photos and correspondence, handwritten reflections, private notes during the Montgomery bus boycotts, and the struggle she endured after. Adrian and our exhibit director, Mr. David Mandel, and his team have curated a beautiful gallery that will tell Ms. Parks' story in her own words and photographs. So it is our honor to open the exhibition tomorrow to the general public on December 5th, the 64th anniversary of the Montgomery bus boycott. And as part of the opening, we are releasing, I Am a Librarian, this companion book, Rosa Parks in Her Own Words, written by the library's Susan Rayburn, and includes many of the photographs and documents you will see in the exhibition, and we are delighted to be joined by the people from the University of Georgia Press who worked with the library's publishing office to create this elegant companion piece. And we are also starting something new with this exhibition at the Library of Congress. For the first time, we are launching a Ask a Librarian mobile research station within the exhibition, and visitors will have the opportunity to, right there in the exhibit, delve more deeply into subjects, themes, collection materials, and online resources related to Mrs. Parks' life through direct interaction with a librarian. And before I go, I also have to acknowledge the generous donors who made this exhibition possible. The Ford Foundation, the Catherine B. Reynolds Foundation, and the Reynolds are here, with additional support, with support from AARP, History, Joyce and Thomas Moorhead, who are also here, and the Capital Group. We can't thank you enough for your generosity and for your support of this exhibit. Now, as the curator, Adrian Cannon, explained to me, the storyteller of this exhibition is Rosa Parks. It's her words and her voice that will be echoing through the gallery as you walk around the display. It is the full story of Rosa Parks, the seasoned, lifelong activist and the woman behind the civil rights icon.
We're going to find out which of these ladies really is the incredible Rosa Parks. Will the real Rosa Parks please stand up?
Rosa Parks is often taught as a sort of meek seamstress who one day sort of accidentally stumbles into history and refuses to give up her seat on the bus, launching the modern civil rights movement. And that version, taught in schools and often celebrated nationally, very much distorts and limits who Rosa Parks actually was. Her activism starts 2 decades before her historic bus stand on December 1st, 1955, and will continue for 4 decades after.
As far as I can remember, during my lifetime, I resisted the idea of being mistreated and pushed around because of my race. And I felt that all people should be free regardless of their color.
One day when I was about 10, I met a little white boy named Franklin on the road. He was about my size, maybe a little bit larger. He said something to me and he threatened to hit me, balled up his fist as if to give me a sock. I picked up a brick and dared him to hit me. He thought better of the idea and went away. I love that. I love that. She, at 10, she knew the deep injustice of things.
Perhaps the case that guts her the most is a case about a 16-year-old by the name of Jeremiah Reeves. Jeremiah Reeves was a high school student, a jazz drummer, and delivered groceries, and had started having a relationship with a young white woman. It got found out. She cried rape.
They actually put him in the electric chair at Kilby Prison and told him if he didn't confess, he would be electrocuted on the spot, and so he gave this false confession. And so she began writing letters and trying to organize around blocking that execution, got Dr. King involved, and it didn't succeed. And he was executed, and she would tell me how devastating that was and how it broke her heart.
This is a Rosa Parks letter from 1956. I cried bitterly that I would be lynched rather than be run over by them. They could get the rope ready for me at any time they wanted to do their lynching. While my neck was spared of the lynch rope and my body was never riddled by bullets or dragged by an auto, I felt that I was lynched many times in mind and spirit.
She was a believer that you had to dissent, that you had to voice your objection, even if you couldn't see that that would do any good.
Rosa Parks, like my mom, has her own definition of who she is, and she doesn't let anybody change that definition. Help plan for a better world of tomorrow by giving all of the love, care, and guidance to our children of today.
As a child, when you read about important people, I thought that these were physical giants, people who spoke a language that was different from the language that I spoke, and I found that those were regular people. And so I have always felt that, a person does not have to be out of this world to accomplish something extraordinary.
We must have courage, determination to go on with the task of becoming free, not only for ourselves, but for the nation and the world. Cooperate with each other, have faith in God and in ourselves. And I just think we underestimate the kind of courage it took to stand up to these forces that had silenced and marginalized Black people from the very day we came to this continent, and yet she was taking them on. I think it was really an amazing part of her legacy was the courage, the strength, the bravery that defined her as a human being.
I think when we're involved in excavating American history and coming to terms with our real history, I think too often we find that most history is a sanitized Madison Avenue version of it. But she's a lifelong activist, and she represents the variety of strategies to combat the persistent racism in the United States. I think it's important that we liberate Rosa Parks and liberate ourselves from the tyranny of this superficial history.
Hurt, harm, and danger. The dark closet of my mind. So much to remember. And yes, it's somewhere in the dark closet of my mind too. It can't help but be in the dark closet of your mind, and you should never forget. There is so much to remember. But I also know that this exhibit will show that Rosa Parks made a difference in moving us forward. And move forward we must. Even as we remember the past, we have to look to a brighter future.
Please welcome the Honorable John Lewis, representative from Georgia.
Good evening. You're a beautiful group. You look good. Let me say to the Librarian of Congress, thank you. I don't want to cry tonight, but I may shed some tears. Thank you for opening this place to have this exhibit in honor of a savior of our country, of our democracy. If it wasn't for Rosa Parks, Fred Gray, and Mr. Gunter, and the rest of you, I don't know where I would be. I don't know where our nation would be. I don't know where we would be as a people. This woman, by sitting down, she encouraged so many of us to stand up. And since then, many of us have never looked back, and we will continue to look forward. Fred Gray would tell you, my friend, my attorney, Fred, you were an attorney for many of us. You probably had unbelievable number of clients. People just came and said, we need your help. I grew up in rural Alabama. About 50 miles from Montgomery, we round it off by saying 48 to 50 miles from Montgomery. My father had been a sharecropper, a tenant farmer. But in 1944, when I was 4 years old, and I do remember when I was 4, my father had saved $300. And a man sold him 110 acres of land. We still own that land today. Growing up, outside of Troy, people lived in fear. We saw the sign saying white only, colored only. White boys, colored boys. White girls, colored girls. Growing up, I was told by my mother, my father, my grandparents, and my great-grandparents, don't get in trouble. But Rosa Parks inspired us to get in trouble. And I've been getting in trouble ever since. She was saying, in effect, when you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, you have an obligation to say something, to do something. I met Rosa Parks. My staff have prepared a statement, but I can't stay with it. I've been moved by the Spirit. Had been for Rosa Parks. Growing up there, I don't know what would have happened to so many people. She inspired us to find a way to get in what I call good trouble, necessary trouble. I followed the drama of Fred Gray of Montgomery. I followed your leadership. Followed the words of Martin Luther King Jr., the action of Rosa Parks. We were too poor to have a subscription to the local newspaper, but my grandfather had one. And when he would finish reading his newspaper, he would pass it on to us to read. So I read about you, Reverend Abernathy, Rosa Parks. And I kept saying to myself, If the people in Montgomery can organize and stand up, we too can stand up and organize. So there was a little college about 8 or 10 miles from my home called Troy State, now known as Troy University. Didn't admit black students. So I got a chance to get an application and apply to go to the school. I never heard a word from the school. So I wrote a letter to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and told him I needed his help because I had been inspired by Rosa Parks. Dr. King wrote me back and sent me a round-trip Greyhound bus ticket and invited me to come to Montgomery to meet with him. How can I forget it? Fred Gray, you still look the same way, so young. Met me at the Greyhound bus station and drove me to the First Baptist Church, pastored by the Reverend Ralph Abernathy, and ushered me into the church. And I saw Martin Luther King Jr. and Reverend Ralph Abernathy standing behind the desk. And Dr. King said, "Are you the boy from Troy? Are you John Lewis?" And I said, "Dr. King, I am John Robert Lewis." I gave him my whole name, but he still called me the boy from Troy. And over the years, I had an opportunity to meet Rosa Parks and to talk with her. She was so wonderful, so kind, and she kept saying to each one of us, "You too can do something." She inspired us to participate in the sit-ins, to study the way of peace, the way of love, to study the philosophy and the discipline of nonviolence. Again, I want to thank you, Madam Librarian. I want to thank you for what you're doing to help educate and sensitize another generation to stand up, to be brave, to be bold, to be courageous. And if when people see something that is not right, not fair, not just, do something. We cannot afford to be quiet. We live at a time when we must save our democracy, save our planet. We must do what Rosa Parks did. When it comes a time to sit in or sit down, do it. Time to stand up, stand up. Come a time to speak up and speak out. Come a time to get in the way or to get in good trouble, necessary trouble, do it. Be brave, be bold, be courageous. Rosa Parks believed as I believe. We have a right to know what is in the food we eat. We have a right to know what is in the water we drink, what is in the air we breathe. And each one of us today must find ways to tell the story of Rosa Parks. One brave woman, with the help of hundreds and thousands, have changed America forever. To use the way of peace, the way of love, to follow the teaching of Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr., to make our country better and to help save our little planet. So thank you very much for being here tonight. And again, let me thank the Library of Congress. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Lewis. You are a living icon, and we owe so much to you. Thank you for being here, and thank you, thank you, thank you. And now, we have more special guests joining us for an extraordinary discussion on the life and legacy of Rosa Parks. We are joined by attorney Fred Gray, who made history by representing Mrs. Parks after her arrest in Montgomery, and Jane Gunter, who offered her seat to Ms. Parks on the day of the bus on December 1st, 1955. And they will be joined by CBS News correspondent and the anchor of the Saturday edition of CBS This Morning, Ms. Michelle Miller, who will be moderating a discussion. Please welcome attorney Fred Gray, Ms. Jane Gunter, and Michelle Miller.
I feel honored and privileged to be here. Madam Librarian, thank you. Thank you all for being here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Gunter, Mr. Gray, when you see this exhibit, it shatters the notion of Rosa Parks as an accidental activist. Finally, that myth of an accidental activist will go by the way. The history, in her own words, will be spoken. The woman the two of you knew will be known. And part of the reckoning, I find, with what we see upstairs is this funny, feisty, incredibly savvy American. You knew her long before 1954. And I want you to describe her, that first moment you met her.
Yes, ma'am.
You were. Thank you, sir.
I was, but may I, before I answer that question, thank the librarian for inviting me to share this occasion here. I have my wife, Carol, here, some other relatives, if you just raise your hand, those who are here. And I also have the president of the National Bar Association that I serve as its national president, President Robinson, is someplace here. And I just want to thank those persons who have come. And I want to thank Congressman Lewis. He wanted me to end up filing a lawsuit so he could go to Troy State, but his parents were afraid and he was a minor. But we introduced him to Dr. King, and it introduced him to the movement, and the rest of his history. Now, what was your question?
Back to Rosa Parks.
Yes.
Back to that day that you met her. How would you describe her?
I had met Rosa Parks not just on December 1st, 1955, but I really first met her when I was a student at what was then Alabama State College for Negroes, now Alabama State University. I lived on the west side of town. Alabama State was on the east side of town. I was a student trying to learn how to be a teacher had already learned a little something about how to be a preacher, and that's the biggest things that black boys in Montgomery, Alabama in the 30s, 40s, and 50s could be. And I found out that Ms. Parks worked with the NAACP. She also worked with E.D. Nixon, who was a family friend of ours, who was Mr. Civil Rights. So they were very much interested in doing whatever it took so that African Americans would be able to enjoy the same rights and privileges as others. I then had to ride the buses, and it was because of problems we had on the buses, including a man who was killed as a result of an altercation on the bus, that I decided, in addition to being a preacher and being a teacher, I was going to be a lawyer. They tell me that lawyers help people. And I felt that the black people in Montgomery had a real problem with buses. And so I made a personal commitment when I was a teenager. I was going to finish college, go to somebody's law school, become a lawyer, but in order to do that, I wasn't going to apply to the University of Alabama, go someplace else, come back, take the bar exam, and destroy everything segregated I could find. While I was thinking about doing that, I saw Mrs. Parks working, doing what I wanted to try to do, and that was my first beginning. Move forward to some 3 or 4 years later. In 1953, I enrolled in Case Western Reserve University Law School in Cleveland. Finished in 3 years. Took the Ohio bar exam just in case. A month later, I took the Alabama bar exam. On September the 7th, 1954, I became licensed to practice. Now I'm ready to destroy everything segregated I could find.
And
shortly thereafter, and one of the things that Mrs. Parks was doing, she was youth director. And one of the young ladies who was in her youth director course at the NAAC was Claudette Carvin. Claudette Carvin was a 15-year-old girl who did what Rosa Parks did, but did it 9 months before without the instructions and without all of the experience which you've learned about that Mrs. Parks had already gone through. But Mrs. Parks, when I opened my law office, she came in and helped me to get it open. She was in the, she worked at a department store off a block and a half from my office, and we talked about these matters. So when Claudette Carvin was arrested, and that was my first civil rights case, but Mrs. Parks was interested, Joanne Robinson was interested, E.D. Nixon was interested, and Fred Gray was interested. However, the black community wasn't quite ready for the lawsuit that I wanted to file. But what those people decided, including Rosa Parks, that we were going to get ready, and whenever the next opportunity presented itself, we would be ready to end up ending the problems on the buses. That opportunity came on the 1st of December, 1955. After Mrs. Parks and I had had conferences in my office almost daily for 5 days a week, telling people, if you decide not to give up your seat on the bus, how could you conduct yourself? We talked about that. We even talked about it on December 1st, 1955. And she knew I was going out of town, but when I got back, I found she had been arrested.
Hold that
so
thought. Hold that thought just for a second. I want to stop right there. So he set the stage. Here she was. For a year, you said, she had been instructed by you on how to act if she'd been arrested, if she decided that she was going to take a stand. Mrs. Gunther, you were 18 years old. You didn't even live in Montgomery, Alabama.
Yes, I did.
You lived outside of Montgomery.
I lived in Montgomery, and my husband was stationed at Maxwell Air Force Base.
So you did not live on the base with
No,
him?
we lived on the base.
You lived on the base with him. How did you come to be on that bus?
Well, after we moved to Montgomery, I went to the doctor at the base and found out I was going to have a baby. And the doctor required that I do a lot of walking. Every day I would walk to the city and walk back. I had a coin with me in case I needed to ride the bus, but I actually did a lot of walking. And that day, I guess I was tired. I have no idea. Maybe I was just ready to go home. But I got on the bus and sat on the long seat behind the driver. And all of a sudden, the driver stood up, turned around, and just bellowed something out to somebody down the aisle. And I realized it was an older woman. Well, she was in her 40s, so that was older. So when he did that, let me have that seat, I just stood up and said, oh, she can have my seat. And when I did that, fair-skinned, tall man pushed his knees into mine and said, don't you dare move.
Don't you dare.
Don't you dare move. And Mr. Gray knows that in the 50s, women did what men said. Totally different from today, but men were in charge of the world. So anyway, that's what happened, and all of a sudden, I sat back down and got off the bus when the driver said, everyone get off the bus. And
did you see her arrest?
No, I did not.
So here you were.
Great with child.
Yes.
She's sitting right here.
Her daughter Jan is in the audience. Exactly 64 years. Oops, I'm sorry. But I think back because no one came forward to tell the story until you. No other person has admitted being there. Why did it take so long for your story to come out?
Because when I got back to the base, I never went back to the city, and I didn't even know anything that was going on in the city. I had no idea there was a bus boycott or this man called Martin Luther King. I had never heard his name. So we came home to Atlanta, and 35 or more years went by of my life, growing a family, and all of a sudden one Sunday afternoon after church, one of my sons was reading on the floor a Life magazine, and he saw a bus. And he said, Mom, this is the funniest looking bus. And I said, oh dear. Sorry. I was on that bus. So immediately, one of us started calling to meet Mrs. Parks. And after the third call, Elaine Steele called back and said, I'm Elaine Steele with the co-founder of the Rosa and Raymond Parks Institute. And Mrs. Parks will be in Atlanta at the C.D. Vivian event, and she would invite you to her hotel room. So we went over in fact, they asked me to give my recollection of that day.
And you gave it. She didn't remember you.
No.
But she remembered what happened on the bus.
And she remembered a tall man. And so when Brenda Davenport from SCLC was the young, one of the interviewers, and she said, well, I'm here to protect Ms. Parks, and I've got to make sure you're not lying.
She wanted to make sure
yeah,
you
I'm
were
going to
legit.
protect Mrs. Parks. And so in a little while, Mrs. Parks says, you were there.
She said you were there.
Right.
For those millennials and zennials out there who have a hard time thinking about a world where a tweet and a social media blast and news 24 hours, 7 days a week. It was a different time in terms of news coverage. Fred Gray, I just want you to describe it. Rosa Parks and what she did on December 1st, no one outside of Montgomery really knew about, did they?
Nobody knew about Rosa Parks?
No.
Or nobody knew about Ms. Gummer?
No, knew about Rosa Parks on December 1st. They didn't know about Rosa Parks on December 5th because the news did not penetrate, was not put out there in the same manner.
With respect to Mrs. Parks' arrest?
Yes.
Yeah.
It wasn't national news, is my point.
It was national news.
It was.
The Montgomery bus boycott, after we stayed off of the buses on December 5th, it made the news.
Right.
Her arrest did not make the news until Mr. Nixon leaked the story to the press that we were going to start a boycott on Monday. And Joaz Bell, the reporter for the Montgomery Advertiser, ended up running a story, and really, Mr. Nixon didn't tell us he was going to tell it because we were trying to keep the white people from knowing it, but let the black people know it. But it developed that the best thing happened was for Mr. Nixon to do what he did with Joaz Bell, and as a result, it made the front page on Sunday and Monday that Negroes were going to boycott the buses, and it helped us to get a good start.
Montgomery, Alabama.
In Montgomery, Alabama. But when I talked to Ms. Parks, after I got back in town on December 1st and she retained me to represent her, I asked her to tell me about anybody who did anything on that bus that would help her in her case. She did not tell me any person, white nor black, had offered to help her to do anything. They were there. The officer who had police power asked her to get up. She politely told him she wasn't going to get up. She was not disorderly, and it would have helped her if we had had some witness on the bus, black or white, to come to Mrs. Parks' rescue. But she never told me, and I never subpoenaed anyone to testify on her behalf because we did not know at the time. We knew white people were on the buses, and I'm not saying that she was not there at all. And I'm sure that there were at least more than 10 white people because they had all the seats taken. There were black people on the bus, but nobody thought enough of Ms. Parks to come to Mrs. Parks' rescue, so she was arrested, and the rest is history.
Tell us what was definitively the signature of what made Mrs. Parks, not just her arrest, but her trial resonate. It was a tandem act, was it not?
No. Mrs. Parks had been working on civil rights for years before December 1st.
I understand that, but what I'm trying to point out is that you made very clear to me was that people had been working on the idea of a boycott for some time.
Right.
The decision to boycott the night of her trial on December 5th, that was the impetus, that was the explosion, was it not?
The matter of staying off of the buses as a result of Mrs. Parks' arrest did not originate with Mrs. Rosa Parks.
Right.
She was not the person who was really moving forward with it. As a matter of fact, when I met with her in her living room and talked with her, what we were concerned about then was preparing. There were two things in my mind that I told her that we would be thinking about. The first thing, we've got to get ready for her trial on December 1st, on December 5th. So don't worry about it. I'm going to get that ready. I say, ultimately, we're going to have to file a lawsuit. But I also told us that Joanne Robinson has been talking about asking people to stay off of the buses because we've been having this problem for a long time. But I said, don't you worry about that, Ms. Parks. You've done your part, but I'm going to talk to Joanne Robinson, I'm going to talk to E.D. Nixon, and we're going to see if in addition to people's, your trial taking place, we will have a protest and people will stay off of the buses. I left her house and went to E.D. Nixon's house and talked with him. He was willing to participate in the thing. I told him I was going to Joanne Robinson's house and talk with her. And we talked with her in her living room from the evening of December 1st to the morning of December 2nd. And we sat and planned the various things that had to take place if we're going to get the people to stay off the bus. One, we got to get the ministers because they had more people on Sunday morning than anyone else, and we had to get the message out. We were asking them to stay off of the bus for only one day, but we wanted them to stay off of the bus until they could come back on a non-segregated basis, but we couldn't tell them that. So we talked about the one day. But we had to be prepared that if we were successful, what are we going to do next? Then we said, well, we need somebody to serve as a spokesman. It was Joanne Robinson who suggested my pastor should serve as spokesman.
And who was that pastor? And who was that pastor?
And that was Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., who had just gotten to town about a year before. Normally, E.D. Nixon, Mr. Civil Rights, or Rufus Lewis, who was another political and businessman in the city, would have been the person to serve in that capacity. But what we were afraid of, Joanne and I, if we use either Nixon or Lewis, we may lose some of the other one's supporters. So let's get somebody else. She said, I tell you who. I said, who? She said, my pastor, Martin Luther King Jr. I said, well, I met Dr. King. I don't know him like you do, but that's fine. But I said, let me give you two good positions for these other two men. Let's make E.D. Nixon the treasurer because he knows A. Philip Randolph, who is the founder of a Pullman Car Porters Union, and Mr. Nixon was a Pullman Car Porter. The other man was Rufus Lewis, who was a former coach at Alabama State. He was in the political aspect. He wanted to get people registered to vote. He had a club named the Citizens Club. And in order for you to get in that club, you had to be a registered voter. I said, let's make Nixon the treasurer, make Rufus Lewis the chairman of the Transportation Committee, because if it lasts beyond Monday, we're going to need somebody. Well, and I said, Rufus Lewis' wife, Jewel, is co-owner of the largest funeral home in town, Ross Clayton Funeral Home. Guess what? They have automobiles. We need automobiles to take people to and from work, make him chairman of the Transportation Committee, and we'll have the transportation solved. And Joanne said, what I'm going to do when we get through here, Fred, I'm going to go over to Alabama State and get some students and draw up a leaflet. And in this leaflet, I'm going to say another black woman has been arrested. Her trial is going to be on Monday. Let's stay off of the buses as a protest. That's what happened, and the rest is history. And those things that we planned, and neither one of us, it couldn't be afforded that Fred Way was out here doing all that. I would have gotten disbarred before I got barred.
And they tried to,
Joanne Robinson couldn't afford to do it because she taught at Alabama State, and they would summarily fire her, and she got fired later on. The plan, there was a lot of plans that went into making the bus boycott what it was. But what inspired Mrs. Parks and what inspired Joanne Robinson and what inspired Dr. Martin Luther King was a 15-year-old girl, Claudette Carvin, who who did what Mrs. Parks did 9 months before. And we all said, if Claudette could do that, then all of us can do whatever it takes. And we stayed off of the buses for 282 days. Now you know the rest of the story.
In fact, Rosa Parks was convicted. Rosa Parks was convicted. And
go ahead.
Claudette Colvin's case was the case that won against segregation.
All right. Claudette Colvin's was let me take them in chronological order.
Yes, sir.
We'll take Rosa Parks' case.
Set it straight.
She was the one arrested on December 1st. So my first responsibility was to see that she was adequately represented on December 5th. I knew that they were going to convict her. There was no way in the world that Judge Scott could end up finding her not guilty. I knew that. So I wasn't going to waste a lot of time with the trial. I was going to let them put their case on, cross-examine their witness, raise my constitutional questions. Don't put on any evidence because none of them could say that she had acted disorderly, and see what happened. And what did they do? They convicted her. So on her case, we appealed it to the circuit court, then it had to go all the way up through the Alabama courts and then ultimately to the U.S. Supreme Court. So that was one case. But if we had gotten her found not guilty, all that would have happened is she would have been not guilty, and the city ordinances and state statutes requiring segregation would have still been on the books. So we had to have another lawsuit. And that suit was a case of Browder versus Gale. Now I get an opportunity to let our people know at this point in time, and then this was a couple of days after Dr. King's house had been bombed, we need to go ahead and file this case. And the question is, I knew in my own mind I was not going to use Rosa Parks as a plaintiff in that case. And I wasn't going to do it because if I had done that, her case was up on appeal. And what the city would have said is that this is a collateral attack on her appeal case. So let's let her case go through the state court system. Let's get some other good plaintiffs. And I could think of no better plaintiff than Claudette Colvin, this young girl, but she was a minor, so her parents had to be involved. And the result was that we ended up selecting 4 other persons. And that was the case of Browder versus Gale that ultimately desegregated the buses. But if Mrs. Parks, if Claudette had not done what she did on March 2nd, 1955, it is quite possible that Mrs. Parks may not have done what she did on December 1st. If she had not been arrested, there would have been no trial, there would have been no meeting at Hope Street Baptist Church. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would not have been introduced to the nation at that time, and the whole history of the civil rights movement would have been different, but for the 15-year-old girl, Claudette Colvin. While we honor Mrs. Parks here tonight, and if Mrs. Parks was here, I am sure she would be glad to say that part of her inspiration, along with what she had been doing for years before, was to be able to inspire young girls like Claudette to do what she did. So we also honor Claudette Colvin and the plaintiffs in that case, as they did in Montgomery on this past Sunday, when they also unveiled a statue of Rosa Parks, and they honored the persons in Browder versus Gale.
It almost sounds as if, because this young woman was in Rosa Parks' youth ministry, that she inspired a young woman who then inspired her. It's a pay it forward moment.
Yes.
Over and over and over again.
Yes.
And here you are, 64 years later, a practicing attorney. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I just want to know how your legacy, Rosa Parks' legacy, impacts what is happening in today's struggle. As Rosa Parks has always said, the struggle continues. And so I wonder how this continuum of your legacy informs that.
Well, I don't know about my legacy, and these historians will have to decide that. But I know this. I know that at least 2 generations of people have been born who know nothing at all about hardcore segregation. They don't know about the problems that we had. And I think if I will have a legacy, and I think if Mrs. Parks was here tonight, that she'd be happy for all of this that we're doing. But I think she would also want us to say thank you and all of that, but to look at where we are now and see the progress we have made. But even more importantly, is to see what needs to be done to solve the problem so that all of the people in this country will enjoy all of the rights and privileges that the majority enjoys. And that has not ended yet. So the struggle continues. I believe she would think, and I believe, that there are 2 major problems that are still facing us that we need to be serious about. One, this country still has some serious racial problems. Racism has not been eliminated in this country. This country has never really faced up to taking affirmative actions toward destroying racism. We have chipped at it a little bit, but we've never really worked on it. So that's one problem that needs to be, and if I have a legacy, or if Mrs. Parks has a legacy, I think she would want us to complete the task of doing away with racism so that everybody, regardless of their race, color, creed, sexual orientation, will be able to enjoy the same rights and privileges.
And
I think there is a second point, and that is, in this country, there is too much inequality between the majority. When I think about majority, I think about white people, and the minority, and I think about African Americans and others. The disparity between those 2 are so great. And if you will, and this is nothing new, the United Negro College, not the United Negro College Fund, but the National Urban League has a report they make every year to the president. And what I'm telling you about this part of it, you can find in their annual reports.
it's the state of Black America.
Yeah, the 5 areas that you measure economics by, African Americans at the bottom are at the lower part, and whites are at the top. If you take, for example, in unemployment, we are less than, twice less than where white people are. If you take poverty, we are 3 times in worse shape than whites are. And if you take incarceration, we are incarcerated 16 times as whites. So what I'm saying to you is that inequality needs to end. Those 2 things, inequality and racism, nothing new. They've been here since slavery time, but they're not going to go away unless somebody do something. If we had done nothing, if Mrs. Parks had done nothing, if Claudette had done nothing, it wouldn't have happened. So then, what we need to do, if you can take what we did in the civil rights movement, the must boycott and everything else, number 1, you have to recognize that we still have a problem. Because if you don't think we have a problem, then we're not going to solve it. Secondly, you got to come up and prepare and make some plans. Joanne and I made the plans and passed it on to somebody else. You don't have to try to execute it all. Pass it to somebody else. And then when you do that, you've got to execute these plans. And these two things needs to be done, and it needs to start at the top. It started at the White House. It should go to the Congress. It should go to the Supreme Court. It should go to the heads of our CEOs and our educational institutions to do away with racism and do away with inequality. That, I think, is the legislature.
And in fact, Chris Rock, a comedian of our times, has said that racism is not a black person's problem. Racism is a white person's problem. And Mrs. Gunter, I look at you, this beautiful white woman who says she was so inspired by Mrs. Parks. You met with her. You say she changed your life. How did she?
I didn't think about that in the beginning. I was busy growing a family, living life, until that magazine incident. And then we met with Mrs. Parks, and before that meeting was over, Mrs. Parks said that I was there. And that interview was done by Marie Majante, Brenda Davenport of SCLC in Atlanta, and Elaine Steele. So they asked me if I would tell my recollection of the day. And when I told my recollection of what happened that day, and then Brenda tried to protect Mrs. Parks, then Mrs. Parks said, no, she was there.
You're a missionary, you're a pastor. You work within the movement to this day.
Till this day. I go to schools and talk to children about Mrs. Parks and the bus boycott. And every February, all my days are filled, and I love it. I enjoy it, especially seeing children learn what really happened from my eyes.
Do you see the struggle through the eyes of Mrs. Parks? Do you see this is your struggle now?
I don't see it as a struggle for me at all. I have absolutely no conflict with red, yellow, black, and white. I work with all kinds of people, and we're just people. And any choice sermon would be about peace and love and kindness and forgiveness.
Forgiveness. Thank you both. Jane Gunter. Thank you, Fred Gray.
May I mention two things?
Sure.
And I'll make it short. I referred to this earlier, and again, I want to commend this library for having this exhibit for Rosa Parks here. But people can't come from all over the country and see what's here. You have museums all over this country who needs our support, and they are deserving of that support so that the story can be told and they will be educated on it. One of those organizations is located in Tuskegee, Alabama, the Tuskegee Human and Civil Rights Multicultural Center, also known as the Tuskegee History Center. Historic Tuskegee, it gives the movement and the history of all of the people, Native Americans, European Americans, and African Americans under one roof. It also serves as a permanent memorial for the men in the Tuskegee syphilis study. I represented those men too. And it gives a brief history of the civil rights movement from slavery time until the present, showing about 5 cases that people from Tuskegee, Alabama filed that are national in scope. We ask for your support, and if you want to learn some more about it, just let me know. That's the first thing. The next thing, All of what I have told you tonight about the movement and more is found in my autobiography, Bus Ride to Justice. Carol has a copy of one of them over there. If you want some, we can make some auto blanks for you and let you have them. But what I'm saying is, our problem is if our young people don't know what has happened, and if we don't educate them on it, then it will never get done. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you.
Well, you have seen history in the making, haven't you? And that's what we had hoped, that you would see and hear from people who lived history, people who appreciate history, and we'll have some of those brochures for everybody too. But thank you so much. And we have been joined by Mr. Mark Moriel, the head of the National Urban League, and so that report is available as well. And sir, you should know that this exhibit is going to be online so people everywhere can see everything. We thank all of you for being here and being part of this discussion, and now we invite you to go upstairs and see the exhibit.